Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. I'm doing the full character review for More the Merrier, the new Lunar New Year character, and War of the Visions just released today. I did a preliminary analysis based upon her announcement, but now we've actually got to see her up close and personal, so I have more thoughts on how she'll function in the game. The review breakdown is going to be a general character overview, report card, and stat analysis, my general thoughts to kind of tie everything together, the class and job overview, going through the abilities individually, and then I'm going to do two little classroom sessions here. One is looking at the Regen healing power buff and how that essentially works in her kit, and then we're going to look at the status effect games and calculations that she can basically play with the other high faith units. Then finally, to wrap things up, we'll go over notable vision cards, espers, and weapons just to kind of top things off. Kicking things off now though, the character overview, brand new wind unit in the game. They did create the Apothecary job for her while also giving her the Rune Knight and Mage subjob. Really interesting combination of things there. She does equip gloves as the weapon. She's very similar to the Energist job to some degree, where she does have missile attack as her basic attack. That actually scales off her magic stat, which is pretty cool. And she does have a couple other missile attacks in the kit, but we'll get to that soon. She does equip hat cloth and accessory with a move of 3 and a jump of 1. In terms of resistance is pretty standard, minus 10% to ice, 20% strength against earth. For the weapon types though, minus 10 to strike, no big deal, not a common attack type anyway, but overall looking really good here, where highest resistance 15% to missile, 10% to magic, and then 5% to slash with 0% at pierce. So that's a really great starting point overall for her. And for status elements, 50% to charm and slow, and then 10% to paralysis. There's a piece of me, I really kind of wish one of her resistances was to silence, but that's okay. These aren't the worst resistances in the world, just not ones I think you see quite often. We're getting to the DPS report card here. So effective HP, and just again for those of you not familiar with the term, it's basically their health pool, but it's adjusted for things like their defense, their spirit, their resistances, to kind of normalize it so that instead of thinking of it as what is their health pool, it's instead like how much damage do you have to do to them in order to kill them. So when you think of it in that way, her effective HP is actually a C. She's on the lower side of things, quite honestly, and if we're looking at the differences between physical and magical types of damage, she's a C on both of them as well. Really no particular strength on one over the other. Definitely on the squishier side of things, but certainly not on the bottom of the tier, but definitely on a lower end of the spectrum by and large. When we're looking at her primary stat, and in Magic in particular, it's an A. She might as well even be an A plus to some degree, where she's at near the top of the charts for the DPS. A lot of the other people that surpass her are support oriented. She's basically tied with Elena for base Magic before any passives or equipment, so overall really great starting point for her. From an agility perspective though, C plus. She's actually not very fast at all. Her agility without any kind of passives or external help is a couple points below the average UR unit, which isn't a great starting spot. She does have a passive that increases it by 12%, which is why I round her up to the C+, but definitely something you want to potentially watch out for in the turn order of things, particularly when you take her against the light comp, which we're going to talk about a fair amount throughout this presentation. Her accuracy, though, A+. You don't have to really worry too much about what you're seeing on the screen here. This is this spreadsheet that I manage that essentially calculates what their total innate accuracy is. I get some scenarios here if they have 35% luck or 35% dexterity or both. Long story short, she's already top 5 most accurate characters in the game with her Rune Knight passive, which gives her a 20% buff. Even without that, she's still in the top 5, but what really, jettisons her to the potential top above some of the others with similar dexterity stats is that she also has 15 accuracy on her mastery ability, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But overall, A+ accuracy, no guaranteed hits. That's okay though. She has just as good a chance as anybody in the game to hit her evasive targets, particularly when you're gearing her properly, but definitely a good thing for her right out of the gate. Her evasion is a C, straight average, and that basically means no evasion at all for all intents and purposes, so don't even try to gear her for it. Movement is a C as well. Move of 3, jump of 1. I don't see any other ways for her to increase or decrease that in her kit in terms of passives or abilities. Totally fine. Not everyone needs it. In terms of passives, I'm actually giving her a B. They're good passives. They're not great passives. There's some flexibility in how you can build her, but it is kind of limiting too to some degree. So I'm giving her a B overall. Could be better. The counter ability is also giving her a B. It's not bad. It certainly is exactly what she needs in order to do her job. But when you talk about versatilities, something to be desired. It's a B. Overall kit though, I'm giving it A+. It's an absolutely stellar kit, very creatively done to do the exact purpose that it's designed to do. Giving her a final grade of an A-. I don't think she's a game-breaking character by any chance, but I do think she is particularly good against the light cast. Obviously, some of that remains to be seen as we put things into practice and as the maps change and as new characters come out for the light, which are going to kind of change things overall. But final grade is an A- for doing that, to which I think she does pretty well. Now, my general thoughts on her, as just mentioned, looks to counter the light meta very well on paper, and in some of the preliminary testing my guild has done seems to be the case to some degree, but more specifically, very creative kit that relies on status effects. So a lot of access to poison, to sleep, paralysis is an option on one of her subjobs, and then silence on the limit break. So this is a really important part of her kit overall that's going to be heavily utilized. And when you're going against units that aren't 97 faith or magic oriented, she's definitely going to struggle a lot more. That's why I say versatility wise, she's not the most versatile character in the game. But for doing her job, definitely a thumbs up. One of the things I do like, she has an amazing selection of buffs to choose from, where one of them is a 30% defense and spirit AoE increase, while also giving herself Regen, very powerful. She also has an ability that gives herself re-raise, and while that is in effect, she gets a 40% magic buff, 30% accuracy buff, which is nuts, and 30% to healing power, which really great. Her Time Mage sub gives her access to haste and quicken, which is absolutely amazing. We'll get to that soon, but technically another buff to throw in the rotation when you're talking about quicken or hasting an ally. And then her TMR ability is like one of my favorites that I've seen in quite some time. It's absolutely amazing. So a lot of really, really high impact buffs to choose from. Almost too many when you think about the turn order and what's realistically feasible. She does counter high faith units very well, but relatively squishy otherwise. Not the worst thing, but certainly, run of the mill. She does have access to missile and slash type attacks, which I think is kind of cool that she's got some diversity. Primarily a magic attacker, don't get me wrong, but does have those little bit of extra attack types to kind of throw in the mix there. And I don't think it's terribly overpowered, because when you think about the light meta in particular, it's Jane and Elena, which are known for their missile and slash types. So it's not like she's really breaking the game. It's really right in line with what people are fighting against already anyways. Interesting self AP auto restore on one of her abilities. A lot of people have to use the Zizabels or the Lucio TMR to regenerate AP. Don't get me wrong, she starts off with a lot of AP, more than your typical attacker, but it's only 50% of her AP pool. The vision card does allow for some decrease in the AP consumption, but in a longer battle, she will run out of AP at some point. The fact that she has an ability that can generate AP for 3 turns, really interesting in terms of the longevity of the battle. And then finally, she will suffer to some degree in more hilly environments. I say that because all of her AoE abilities that I can tell are a AoE height of 1, which essentially just means that if a character is on a height of 2 and another one's on a height of 4, she doesn't have a single ability in her kit that can hit both of them, which when you talk about mages is kind of unique. A lot of characters do have some forgiveness when it comes to AoE on varying levels of height, and she doesn't. So not the worst thing in the world, but definitely something to consider when you're looking at where she might be best on certain maps. For the class job overview, the passive abilities, Thriving Mentality, I like a lot for that agility boost, and don't get me wrong, the 24% magic is also really great. I am a big fan of Wind Enhancing Rune as well. 25 wind attack is extremely powerful. I am particularly fond of the Sharp Mind one here, where increased spear penetration is very strong considering her damage type, but the accuracy of 20% is very impactful. And then finally, Speedcast is cool if you're using the Time Mage, but really not necessary. Almost all her other abilities are instacast, so you're probably never going to use that. The Null CT changes definitely has a place depending upon if you're using haste or quicken. The one I'm saving for last, not to really talk about, toxins and sedatives, is very interesting, and we're going to talk about this more, where it increases our chance to apply poison and sleep. There's definitely some mathematical benefits to having this on, and certainly a time and place. Get to that soon. For the counter abilities, Mind Over Magic, I am a big fan of this one. It's just renamed from a lot of the other abilities. It's a 20% chance to reduce the magic damage taken by 45%, which I like a lot. Again, light meta, you're going to see a lot of that. Magic Commutation, pretty standard. I do like that it's an increase of AP to self, but I don't think she really needs it. But the fact that it's a damaging ability is kind of cool. And slow counter's not bad either. Not my favorite ability, but if you're talking about status effects on enemies, Elena and Jaden and handfuls of others are certainly susceptible to the slow status effect, so I like that a lot, that this is another potential status effect to throw into her kit. Now for the Apothecary, the main job. Apologies for the way this looks. There's a lot of text on here, and I could not find a creative way to go through it. Just going through some of these one by one. Vidiation is an interesting one. One of her first poison attacks, it's a missile type attack, which is really cool. low AP cost, pretty decent range, thumbs up for sure. The second one, good health and happiness. This is that AoE buff of defense and spirit that I mentioned earlier, while also giving her regen to herself. Love this ability. It's one of her teammate buffs, so that's a good thing for agility tuning and turn order where you can dictate her initial movement. But there is some research to still be done on her priority of abilities. So far from, and we'll get into this in a second, so far from what I can tell, she prioritizes her TMR and then Quicken if you have it enabled on the Subjob, and then she prioritizes good health and happiness, and then she prioritizes her re-raise ability, which is the next one, which is kind of interesting that re-raise is kind of down the ladder. But anyways, Life of Longevity and Prosperity is her re-raise, and when she has that re-raise effect on her, she gets those buffs we talked about to magic, accuracy, and healing power. One thing I am interested in seeing is if she gets re-raised from an external source, does she still get the buffs? What I mean is if Yuna gives her re-raise, does she still get the buffs? I would imagine so, but needs to be tested. Soul Sedation is an interesting one. It's a 25% chance to inflict sleep, and there's an increase of 20% chance to proc if you have regen or AP auto restore on yourself. Sleep, by and large, is, not my opinion, not the most impactful status effect, but when you are talking about disrupting turn order, going against high agility units, even just disrupting the general flow of things, I think the sleep is still a powerful tool in her kit. Divine Toxicology is the one that I'm really a big fan of. This is a nice AoE that has a chance to inflict poison, but for those that do get affected by it, it is also a defense and spirit imperil to them, as well as a nerf to their healing powers. So the imperil number one is absolutely amazing. But number two, the healing power, it also does have a tangible benefit when you're going against someone like Engelbert, who has a passive that increases it, and when he uses Retribution Drain, he'll regenerate some of that health. Overall, this ability does a ton of things well that I'm a real big fan of. And then finally, Meridian Channel, really great ability, Spirit Penetration of 40% when you attack with it. This is the one that grants her the AP Auto Restore for 3 turns. So overall, I think it's a really great kit. All of these are insta-casts, which are really awesome when you're talking about going against high-speed offenses like Elena Jaden. And the Subjob for the Apothecary is actually not bad either. So this Hypodermic Surge is another type of poison infliction. It's another missile-type attack, a little higher in the modifier, but Hyposthesia I think is a really interesting one. I don't know the exact time or place in which she would use this because essentially because it's a non-damaging attack, it will never get prioritized over a damaging attack if she can do so, if she can hurt an enemy. That being said, because it is a TP ability and it's 24 TP, it also takes a back seat to these two buffs. And these do have multicast, so I can't imagine a situation where you might be using, or where the AI might be using this in a battle, but I think it's a really interesting ability that decreases agility by 20% if the person gets paralyzed. The Rune Knight Subjob I am a big fan of. I think Drain Evocation is absolutely amazing in that it increases the slash resistance penetration, very long range, does absorb HP, which is great for her. And my opinion of her durability overall is just that as long as she's not getting one shot by a lot, she's going to end up surviving decently so, where there's enough ways for her to regenerate health on her own that although she's a little bit squishy, the fact that she has re-raise and kind of, has a get out of jail free card allows for some more survivability than you might think on paper. But other than that, the rest of this, Windbreak Rune is going to be great for PvE content to decrease wind resistance, but nothing else too crazy. And then finally, the Time Mage Subjob. This one I love and I hate. So it's broken that they have Quicken on here. I think that's absolutely amazing. The problem that I kind of have is that Quicken is her essentially number 1 or number 2 skill priority, which means all those other great buffs that we saw will never get prioritized if you have Quicken enabled, which is fine. That's certainly a viable strategy, but I don't know what else you might use on the Time Mage Subjob other than Haste. The other ones are relatively hit or miss in terms of the actual usage. So in terms of what's the best sub-job, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion. I do think the Rune Knight probably is, but even then, time and place. Finally, the Limit Break, TMR, and the Mastery. This Limit Break is absolutely amazing. 67% chance to inflict Silence AoE, and if that unit is silenced, they also have a debuff of AoE resistance of 30, which is absolutely nuts. There's so much extra damage to be done when you look at the Wind cast and that they are, a lot of AoE abilities on them. Stellar Imperil on this Limit Break overall. And then the TMR is probably one of my more favorite ones that's come along in quite some time. Number 1, it's a dual cast, which is a very big premium on TMRs. Number 2, I do like that it's a teammate buff, so it's another one that you can fine tune her movement. But third, the ability itself, shell for 3 turns, and then if you have the shell effect, you get crit evasion of 30%. That's positively massive when you talk about countering high crit damage oriented teams like the Lightcast, where they have higher dexterity because of the Jaden card. They have crit damage up because of the Elena card. So when you get this critical evasion, you kind of nerf a lot of what makes them strong to some degree. And then finally, the mastery ability, nothing too crazy here. HP attack for the allies and herself, magic with 10% to self, but the accuracy of 15 to herself, really, really important. Part of why I gave her an A+ before in terms of accuracy rating. Now, when we're looking at healing power, particularly for her regen, I kind of wanted to go over how the mechanics of healing power, again, go for everybody. Now, typically, healing power increases are increases to modifiers, and if you were to look up something like Curaga, it would say, 210 times, that's the number. This is an example. Someone with 1,000 magic will use Curaga, which is typically 210%, and 30% healing power means that Curaga is really 240%. So you basically take the magic stat times the 240%. There's a little bit of faith equation that goes on there. Bam, that's your total healing. Regen operates a little bit differently in that it's not an actual modifier increase, and it doesn't scale off any kind of magic. It's a strict flat percent off your health pool. So her regen is 20%, which means, and we'll see in a second here, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Something like regen, the healing power up is a multiplier. So rather than restore 20% of your HP, it restores 26% of your HP. You can calculate that by 20 times 1.3. That 0.3 is the 30 healing potency. So I, theoretically testing this as well, more is HP. And it's not base HP that it scales off of. It is total HP. So if she had, 4382 total HP, the normal 20% regen would restore 877 a turn. With the 30% healing potency up, it actually restores 1138. So an extra 260 healing power per turn. It's basically an extra 6%. It adds up over time. I think that's a nice buff for her in terms of regenerating her health pool, with obvious upside to something like if Leela or Ayaka is healing her as well. So certainly benefit from the extra healing from them. The second thing I wanted to go over was the status effect calculations, and there is a little bit of a game here. So the way the calculation typically goes, and we're going to use Soul Sedation as the example, that's the ability that can inflict sleep on someone. The calculation is typically you add the caster's faith and the target's faith, and you multiply that by taking the multiplier of the status effect and subtracting the target's resistance to said status effect. So in this instance, we have someone like Moore, who's 97 faith, versus, we'll say, who's 97 faith. 25% multiplier to sleep, has no sleep resistance, so the chance to put a to sleep is 49%. Now, may not be the greatest percentage, you might want something higher, that's fine, we can. When you have regen or P or AP restore, Soul Sedation gets a 20% buff to the modifier as part of the ability description. So instead of 25%, it's now 45%, which means your chance to sleep is 87%. Well, we're not done yet. There's actually a passive that increases the multiplier. So if you also put on the passive that buffs the chance to sleep by 15%, the status effect multiplier becomes 60%, which means you have a guaranteed chance to sleep, provided she's not stacking a bunch of resistances. We're again assuming 0% sleep resistance. But in all, that's pretty cool. And again, we're talking just about sleep. If we wanted to talk about poison, Divine Toxicology, which is the one with the defense and the spirit in peril, basically the same idea, 49% chance to proc normally with no resistance. And if you have her passive on for the extra 15, the extra 15 bumps that to 40%, basically means you have a 78% chance to inflict poison on her. So overall, some games to be played there in terms of ensuring your hit chance. Definitely time or place for when you might want to have that on. Moving on, the notable vision cards. The one released with Moore's Fervor of the Festival, by far and away the best vision card you could put on her. I don't think it's close. I've heard some arguments that there's some substitutes. I'll counter that in just a second here. So right off the bat, 62 dexterity is roughly 12% extra accuracy. Quick conversion. Great stats otherwise. For wind units, it's another 23% accuracy buff. That's insane, number one. Number two, the decreased AP consumption 20%. That's pretty cool. But overall, you're getting an extra 35% to your accuracy rate here. In addition to, if you recall, one of the buffs when she has re-raise is another 30%. So you're talking like an extra 65% accuracy on top of a character that's already pretty darn accurate. This card, who needs guaranteed hit when you have something like this? The other effects, the party effects, is 25 human killer upon magic attack, increase HP 13%, and the earth resistance of 20% will absolutely destroy, or help you, absolutely destroy any earth comp. Astoundingly good card for her, really and truly. And for a lot of the other wind units, when you think about Halloween Leela, and someone like Varush, who technically does magic attacks, even though it's slash type damage, they are magic attacks, so he will benefit from this as well. The second card, which I also like but I don't love, is Typhon. The thing that's nice about Typhon is the wind resistance of 20% for mirror matchups here. The accuracy 15% is obviously another good thing that it has in common with Fervor of the Festival. Magic Attack 25, kind of in common here with Fervor of the Festival. So a lot of overlap to some degree. The Magic 30% is a nice buff for whoever's holding it. But other than that, the extra luck stat kind of doesn't really get full utilization on more. But that's okay. Still a really good card. Still benefits the party. Still kind of does the same thing to some degree. And that's really it for the wind-oriented cards. There's a couple other cards that I do think have some upside. The one thing about Typhon that I think is really interesting is that it's not limited to wind on two of the party effects. So when you talk about making rainbow comps or putting more in a different kind of comp, Typhon is a nice card in that you can be flexible with also providing these two buffs to non-wind units. You obviously don't get that in a lot of more recent Vision cards. And on that note of, versatile rainbow cards, I do think Solidus is a really great option, again, if you're talking about countering the light. The slash resistance is still applicable to the party. Magic attack is the unit bonus, so I think that's really great. The second one, I think Elena Blackrose of the Battlefield is incredibly impactful because, as we mentioned, her agility is not, it needs some help. And so when you can effectively have this on her, although you may not get all the impacts of some of the other Vision cards, being able to keep up with the turn rotation of light, and even not talking about light for a second, even if you're talking about going against Earth, going against Dark, they're extremely fast comps, and keeping up with that agility is very important. Third, the final card that is kind of comparable, but I'm going to say no, is the Blossoms in the Dark. It does have, obviously, the thing in common with the magic, the human killer on magic attack up, but when you talk about missing out on the dexterity and the accuracy of 23 and the HP of 13%, that HP might sound small, but this is a squishy character. Like, every extra little bit of health pool is monumentally important when you add up all the extra sources of it. Blossoms in the Dark, sure, good for that purpose, but the rest of the Blossoms card really isn't that great. There might be a time when, sure, when we have dual vision cards, you could probably put that in there for similar value, but definitely doesn't do the same thing when you're talking about countering light by any stretch of the imagination, which is kind of what more seems designed to do. Now, notable Espers here. At this point in the game, it really is kind of a chess matchup. There's no more like clear-cut one favorite for many characters. But I do like Bahamut for a handful of reasons, but more primarily high agility, which again she kind of needs, but very high octane magic damage, which I think is really great, that she could just blow people away. The second one that I do like is Typhon. Definitely best if you are running the Rune Knight subjob, but it has wind attack. It's got accuracy nodes in case you want to flex your passive. Like if you want to take Sharp Mind off, you can replace the accuracy nodes here. It does have flat magic percentage buff, which is cool, and slash attack, which is where it comes in handy for the Rune Knight subjob. Third one, I do like Phys. Again, thinking in the context of countering light in particular, which is what she seems designed to do, gives you spirit nodes, which is really great, magic attack, crit evade, and magic resistance, just a smidge, which isn't really going to change a lot, but will probably help if you're seeing Jaden use a lot of jamming thrust attacks. But yeah, not my favorite. Odin, I actually think is really good. Now, not a magic-oriented Esper by any means, but again, a high agility, which he's going to want. But more than that, I think because of how squishy her health pool is, being able to build up those extra slash resistance or missile resistances, again, in the context of light meta, is a really powerful way to keep her alive longer. And obviously, there's some accuracy nodes or man-eater nodes, which you can kind of play with as well for your offensive trade-off. So overall, still another great Esper, even if it's more attack stat oriented than magic stat oriented. I think the trade-offs are worth it. And then finally, Bloody Moon. Definitely a new favorite Esper of 9 for a handful of reasons. Sure, there's a 10% weakness to light on that Esper, and that kind of stinks, but you can kind of correct it. But the other nodes, it does give you spirit, gives you magic attack, gives you missile resistance if you're seeing Jaden, and it's got some accuracy on it as well. So although it's an MR Esper and the stats are a little bit nerfed compared to URs, I do really like the board for the job that she's meant to do. These are just 5, and again, I say these 5 like if you were to prioritize, hey, what Esper should I do first? I think it's probably some combination of this 5. Are there other good Espers? Absolutely. You could do a handful of things with her. And then finally, the weapon optimization. Pious gloves is like a absolute no-brainer. The only other option is the dark gloves, and for all intents and purposes, they're basically the same. The dark gloves do have a little bit more magic stat on them by and large, but the rest of the stats are pretty much equal. But you really can't sacrifice that wind attack modifier. I think that's super important, particularly when you're talking about her using the missile type attack and the slash type attacks on the Rune Knight, where this magic attack 15 will not apply to those, but wind attack 30 will, which is why I think it's like an obvious no-brainer that the dark gloves is just straight up inferior. Even if it might have a little bit more magic stat, when you're using those other attack types, that extra modifier loss is going to be pretty big. So overall, pious gloves definitely the way to go. I'm a fan of the crit build in general, just because I think the trade-off in magic stat here, if you're talking 28 extra, 28 less magic, I don't think that's all that impactful, but that little bit extra accuracy, that little bit extra for crit rate can go a long way in the broad scheme of things. So that is the Lunar New Year More the Merrier review in a nutshell. As kind of consistently said from what I initially thought, I think she is a great addition to the game to kind of hedge what the light is doing in terms of strength. I don't think she's going to break the game by any means, though, because I do think there's a fair amount of ways to counter her. Now, if you're talking about countering wind in particular, I do think ice has some catching up to do, because Joom is very strong, and the rest of the wind units, quite frankly, are incredibly strong. Tifa, 2B, Halloween, Leela, Varush, all of them are amazing. I'm probably leaving out a couple. There's just that many good wind units that, yeah, I think she's a positive addition. For those of you that have pulled for her, hopefully you can see that impact on the gameplay. But otherwise, I'm fairly happy with the decision Gumi went here to kind of throw something new to the mix, particularly with how creative her kit is. I think that's super interesting. But that's all. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to y'all soon.